My climate story, that's what this few minutes is supposed to be about. My climate story is a very strange one, and in many ways it's not relatable at all. And so I'm going to tell you about it by telling you a few different kinds of stories. I'm going to tell you a story about music, yes, a story about climate, a story about research, and a story about action. So, music first. I'm a musician. I'm in the middle of a 50-city U.S. tour right now. Last night we played in Dallas. Tomorrow we're in Phoenix. And then we are heading to Asia. We spend so much of our time touring. I'm in a band called AJR. It's totally fine if you've never heard of us. It's completely okay. 2 woos, okay? 2 woos is okay. 2 woos is okay. My climate story begins here. So the top picture that you're seeing is what one of our shows looks like now. A handful of years ago, we pulled into a venue in San Francisco, and it looked like the bottom picture with the orange sky. We literally had to wear gas masks going into the venue. We started our show early because so many fans were waiting outside because of the forest fires. The other picture that you see is representative of something that I saw this past summer when we were on tour in Athens. In minutes, the entire city flooded. We got to the venue. There was literally lightning happening while we were performing. The entire stage was flooded. And we moved on to the next city. Athens had to stay there and continue to clean up the floods. Now, this is something that I experience all the time on the road, the impacts of climate. And one of the reasons why I studied this more deeply is because I experienced it. In experiencing all of these different things, I ended up staying in school, and I did my PhD in sustainable development and human rights law. And then I ended up founding an organization called Planet Reimagined that is all about bridging research and action. And I'm going to tell you more about that in a moment. But first, when you're an artist and when you have an audience like this one, at least for me, it's a key part of my responsibility to be able to engage fans at a deep level. And so that's what we do on our tour. We spent a lot of time at Planet Reimagined figuring out how to do the social science research to figure out how to get fans to engage deeply around all different types of issues, in particular climate. And so what we did was a study. We spent the last year doing a really in-depth study with Ticketmaster and a handful of other partners. A poll went out to about 350,000 recent concert goers, from Taylor Swift fans to Beyonce fans, really just across the board, all different genres. And we asked them so many questions about how, where, when, why they want to participate in different climate actions. We put out this report, and this report basically says that the era of shut up and sing is over, that fans want artists to not only be talking about these things, but inviting their fans into taking action with them. And so now, at every stop of our U.S. tour, we're doing things like this that you see on the screen. We're working with local organizations, obviously registering people to vote, but at a much deeper level, getting people engaged with local organizations, having them volunteer, petition, even calling their representatives right there on the concourse, on site. We're giving them pre-written scripts of how to ask them to vote in a certain way. And we are also partnered with the governor, who you probably heard from earlier, about saying no to 2117 right here in Washington. Now, at Planet Reimagined, our whole kind of idea behind the organization is about doing this really concrete research and turning it into something that's incredibly actionable. I'm going to tell you one more story. While the Inflation Reduction Act was being negotiated, I spent a lot of time in Congress, back when it was called Build Back Better. I sat down with just as many Republicans as Democrats to try and find areas of overlap. And as all of you in this room probably know, not a single Republican voted for the Inflation Reduction Act. However, I did end up finding some common ground in talking with both Republicans and Democrats. To take it back to this idea of research, We did a really in-depth study and looked at the current oil and gas leases in the United States. Then what we did is we overlaid that with a solar map and overlaid that with a wind map. And we found about 18 million acres of land that were not accounted for in any study yet, where we could expand renewable energy sitting on top of current oil and gas land, helping those oil and gas companies to transition their business. And this was all done through this kind of research. It was all done through a lot of listening to both Republicans and Democrats about what they wanted to achieve in terms of land use, in terms of energy, in terms of security, in terms of reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. So, what does that look like, right? What does it look like if we are going to put renewables on top of this land? It looks like this. Environmental review processes are incredibly important. However, on a lot of this oil and gas land, the environmental review process has already happened. It allows us to cut years out of the process for putting renewables across all of these acres. We have gathered all of this environmental review data already, and it'll just take a reanalysis as opposed to going out and starting from scratch. So speed is one of the key parts here. The next piece that's vital is space. There's so much virgin land out in the United States that we are all talking about putting solar and wind. It's incredibly important, except what if we could use land that's already disturbed? What if there was so much land that was already disturbed that based on our analysis, we could generate approximately 2,000 new gigawatts of renewable energy already sitting on top of oil and gas land? The next reason why this really makes sense across the board is equity. The energy communities across the western United States, particularly in places like New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Montana, they need a transition plan. These are energy communities are failing, and people are leaving, and this gives an opportunity to transition these small, independent oil and gas companies. In places like Wyoming and Utah and Colorado, a lot of the funding that goes to schools and goes to hospitals comes from oil and gas. This solution allows us to fill that gap and provide funding for schools and hospitals coming from renewable energy. So, the last piece that I want to talk about is opportunity, because we don't want to let any of these business owners to be left behind. Yes, they are oil and gas companies, but they are independent oil and gas companies that through market-based solutions like this one, we can help prove to them that this transition is viable for their own businesses, for the jobs of the people that they're employing, and for their bottom line. So this opportunity is this opportunity is a really important one, because in places like Utah, 75% of production is still coming from these independents. Now, the last thing that I want to share is here. This is a bit of a summary, but because we're running out of time, I'm going to fast forward a bit. It's a bipartisan solution. This is key here, right? Because so much of what happens when you're talking about the federal level happens when one party is in power versus when another party was in power. And Gina McCarthy was just talking about some incredibly important legislation, obviously the IRA, that was monumental and that Biden is going to be remembered as the climate president. However, we went into this research with an eye towards how can we achieve something that is not going to be rolled back depending on who is president at the time. We had an equal number of Republicans sign on because we pitched this as something focused around security, as something focused around jobs, as something focused around a local economy. And when we talked to Democrats, it was about removing carbon from the atmosphere, and it was about speeding up the energy transition. The same policy, but bringing it together from two different perspectives. All of this came from years' worth of research putting together this project. And now we are working with a whole bunch of different partners in order to build these pilots across places like New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota in order to set a new standard for how we can transition the oil and gas industry to renewables faster than we ever could before. Thank you. So, what's next? This idea of co-locating things, taking something and putting it on top of something else, already exists. You've heard of agrivoltaics, you've heard of photovoltaics. This idea can work in so many other places. Think about the wind, think about the oil and gas infrastructure that's out in the middle of the ocean. We can co-locate wind in the same places. We're working on this same solution for geothermal, for retired coal plants, for so many other applications. And those 2,000 gigawatts of new renewable energy is just the beginning, and that's just in the United States. So what I want to leave you with is that research becoming something that's actionable is the key to us moving forward and fighting the climate crisis. When I did my PhD, I wrote a 400-page document, and literally 3 people read it. We need to end that. We need to end work being done and sitting on a shelf. So that is exactly why taking research and turning it into action is key here, because you can have solutions from the music industry all the way through energy innovation, and that's what I would say is my climate story. Thank you.